Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a complete guide on the Danish Gambit. There's going to be a PGN in the description if you want to follow the moves yourself. There's also a puzzle on the screen, which is white to play, and you can give it a shot whenever you feel like it. Comment your solutions in the description. This puzzle relates to the Danish Gambit, and we'll talk about how a little later in the video. So let's begin. The Danish Gambit is e4, e5, and now you strike immediately with d4. You give away the pawn. And now you play c3, you give away a second pawn, and here you develop your light square bishop to c4, giving away a third pawn. Now in the resulting position, if they take, bishop takes, we are now down 2 pawns, but we have huge compensation for those pawns. These 2 bishops here are incredibly strong and pose immediate tactical threats. Additionally, we just have a lead in development. We already have 2 very nicely developed pieces and a very strong centralized pawn. They have no piece that has even moved. And so, therefore, we can claim compensation, but you want to be careful. So we're going to look at many different lines in the video today, but the overarching idea that I want you to really make sure you hammer home is this idea of not rushing things, playing with patience, because I think people too often look at this position, say, I have a lead in development, but I'm down material. I need immediately to go for checkmate, but that won't lead to anything because black is still very solid and safe. They can defend the immediate threats. The way that you go ahead and convert a position like this is by continuing to develop, getting your king safe, and later launching an attack when you have an overwhelming army ready to support that attack. So you're going to see this theme again and again in this video. There are moments that, you can go for an immediate tactical idea, for example, on f7, or if they develop the bishop carelessly, you can take on g7. So keep an eye out for the immediate tactics, of course, but don't rely on the entire game ending immediately because a lot of times it won't. Now, let's go ahead and look at some of the main lines that you're going to encounter. Bishop b4 check. Developing the bishop with check. This makes a lot of sense. We're going to play knight c3. Now, you might be wondering, wait a minute, aren't we blocking in our bishop? But again, this is a long-term idea for us. These bishops here, we're just trying to develop our pieces to the most active squares. So, knight to c3, and then knight to f3. They're going to develop. We're going to castle. They're going to castle. And this is one of those positions where now you can start to look to make forward progress. We have an overwhelming lead in development. We have 4 pieces out. They only have 3. But even more importantly, we have a very centralized pawn, which again is a lever for us to create initiative by the move e5. So you can consider e5 here, but I think a very logical move is also to just centralize your knight. Knight to d5. This is also quite thematic. And the idea is that if they take the free pawn or seemingly free pawn in the center, well, now you go queen to c2, you attack this knight. And the issue for them is the knight doesn't really have a good square to go. Look at all of our pieces. We're controlling f6 very heavily. We have our queen out, we have our bishop out. We're starting to attack. For example, if they defend the knight like this, we can simply attack it again with bishop to d3. And if they defend it again with f5, we can now go queen to b3. We're putting pressure on this bishop. We're also threatening some very deadly ideas along this diagonal. Their best option here is to go king h8 and give away the piece. And we're already going to be up material with still a nice positional situation. So that is one of the nice ideas that you have here, centralizing the knight. I should note, if they take this knight off the board, trading pieces, the issue is now the remaining pieces are very limited in squares. If they go to a5 attacking the bishop, we can simply go bishop d3. And there's huge threats. We're already, aiming at this diagonal, but if they just play a move like d6, we can go queen a4. We're hitting the bishop now, and they can't really defend it. If they go c5, we can go a3, continuing to harass the bishop. It is now indeed trapped. So those are some of the ideas that you have in this variation, where they just pin your knight and then develop their pieces. We do the same, we castle, and then we centralize our knight and essentially recognize that our lead in development will lead to a very overwhelming control of the center. That is what the move knight to d5 really signifies, and that will lead to some tactical ideas like the ones we just saw. Now let's take a look at some of the other ideas that we have as white. So if they play the move knight f6, we can immediately start with e5. Now, the knight can't move anywhere. If it tries to centralize, I mean, it can go back, but then they just wasted a tempo. If it centralizes, there's already tactical ideas. Like I said, you do want to always look out for these ideas, so this is a very common one. Sacking the bishop and then going queen d5. Whenever there's a piece on these squares that is undefended, so for example, the bishop, or in this case, the knight, this is a nice tactic to know. You bring the queen in, you fork it, you win back the material with huge interest because the king is now deeply misplaced. Now, I should note, after we play the move e5 with the knight f6, which is a very natural move, because if we get into black's mindset here, they want to develop the bishop, but they hang the pawn here, so they're going to first block the bishop and then develop. But now e5, they have the resource d5, which is their best option. We're going to continue by taking the knight, they take the bishop, and here we can trade. Now, this might not seem so logical because we're down material, but notice that we still have that lead in development, and this pawn here is actually very strong. We can begin by just going knight to d2. They can't take the pawn because then there are a nice fork on the board. And the idea here is to castle and immediately continue putting pressure. So bishop to b4 with the intention of meeting castles with the move c3, forking our pieces, but now we can already win by going knight to e4. The king is hit, and after they block, we can take this pawn. We still have the idea of taking at g7, which we can insert at any moment. And aside from that, I mean, we've regained the material, we have huge development, they have an issue with their king. Going into an endgame like this is something that you should be looking forward to. So that's the ideas to know with knight f6. We can now look at some of their other options. There's the very passive move d6, which basically says, I'm going to lock in the bishop, but I'm up material, I'm just going to develop my pieces, try to consolidate, and survive this opening stage, and then hopefully with my extra material, transform into a positive endgame that is winning. What we're going to do instead is very simple. We're not going to react that heavily. Knight f3, we're developing our piece. If they go bishop e7, they hang the pawn, so again, knight f6 is the move they have to play. And here we castle. You can consider to go e5 at some points. There's a nice tactic to know with bishop takes f7, keep that in mind. But I also like the very simple approach of castling and keeping this one in our agenda for the future. So they're going to go bishop e7. Now, for example, we can go e5, and after they take, we can go queen to b3. This approach keeps the queens on the board, and essentially, we have huge ideas. There's threat on f7, there's constant pressure on b7 if they move the bishop, and if they castle to defend, very logical, we bring another piece into the board. And now it's really, all of our pieces are helping in the attack. There's not a great way for black to defend. I mean, queen e8 is a very sad move to make, and one that could be met with simply rook e1. The idea of this move is pretty simple. We are lining up the rook against the queen, which just generally is a nice positional tension and dynamic to have in the position, because now it makes their developing job very difficult. If they just try to naturally develop the knight, we're going to take. And they can't take with the queen because now they hang the bishop. And if they take with the pawn, we can now take their other knight. And now they can't take with the bishop because they hang the queen. This is the impact of a single rook on an open file in these sort of positions. So in the resulting situation, they have to take with the pawn, and we've completely destroyed their pawn structure. All of these pawns are now weak just by virtue of them being isolated. There's no pawn islands anymore. And we still have tons of pressure. Of course, the knight can come in and impact the position. We have still the rook. We have the idea of constantly looking for these checks. And again, these pawns are going to drop off very quickly. So that kind of is the approach to play against a passive d6. So now we've looked at a majority of the options that you're going to see from the lower levels. I'm going to now look at the main move at the top level, which is the move d5. And the philosophy behind this move is very simple. Black recognizes their biggest weakness here is a lack in development. The move d5 is giving away a pawn back. We're still down a pawn, but we've regained some of the material. But in exchange, black is blasting open this diagonal for the bishop and this file for their queen, and therefore they're claiming that they are equalizing on the front of development. Now, that's not exactly true because we still have the two bishops very strong, but it's the best approach that black can go for. So let's explore this a little bit by looking at a game example. So we, first of all, are already threatening bishop takes on f7, and black's best approach is to allow that to happen, because in the end, there is the move bishop b4, winning back the queen. Now, don't block here, but bring the queen back to get the most out of the position. And when the dust settles, we've traded queens, the material is equal. But white is still a little bit better because they have this centralized pawn, which serves as a constant threat. We always have the idea of going e5. We also have extra pieces just developed, again, a lead in development. And so this is a very thematic endgame. You're probably going to see this very often. And the way that you play this as white is to consolidate your pawn. We go f3, and then develop your pieces. Get the rook to the c file. You can play a3 just to defend the pawn, or not let it hang, rather. You develop your knight. Now, notice that you want to get your king to f2, but then the knight hangs, so the simple rook to c2 achieves the purpose of defending the knight and aiming to get the king out, and then you can bring the other rook in as well. And this is a very equal position. Both players have a lot to fight for. As white, you're going to play on the queen side typically. Your king side is very solid. You want to play on the open files in the center and also on the queen side, and this is what you see white here doing. Now, eventually, through a lot of rerouting the knights, white got a very decent position. Their knights are very powerful. Knight h6 here already. You can see the bishop and the knights just terrorizing the board here for white. It's very difficult to play already. And bishop f6, planting this bishop here, completely getting rid of the squares for the king, hitting the rook as well. And after the rook moves, g4, cementing in the bishop as a very strong piece. And now the move e5, continuing to cement in the bishop. If you were to take this, now there's going to be a passed pawn here. So very dangerous. Instead, black took the seemingly free pawn, but now after bishop takes, knight takes, we infiltrate along the 7th rank, and it was a very quick conversion here for white. They attacked the knight, they brought their other knight in, a couple of checks. Now, because of the superior placement of this rook, along with the very nice kingside expansion white is going for, they have quite a bit of initiative, quite a bit of play, and indeed they ended up converting many moves later. They won the pawn on a4, they cemented their knight as a very strong piece, putting constant pressure, and eventually they broke past with a passed pawn. This was a pawn breakthrough from an earlier video of mine this week, and now the knight defends the pawn. They have to give away the rook, and black tried to promote these pawns, but it's just far too slow, and indeed the game was decided right here. So the Danish, ladies and gentlemen, a very nice gambit to consider. You give away a lot of your pawns, but your bishops become absolute monsters. And this is what is highlighted from the puzzle that you see on the video screen. So if you found the solution, well done. Comment it down below. I'm not going to reveal it just yet, but the idea is to utilize the power of the bishops, which is a theme that you get very often in the Danish Gambit. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Subscribe if you're new around here. Like the video if you learned something new from it, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.